Mm-hmm.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hey guys, I'm Alex.
And I'm Jack.
We're both seniors in PRM and we'll be graduating in May. After that, we'll be moving to Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah, I'll be working as a plumber down there.
And I'll be working as an EMT and a rock climbing guide.
Word.
So the topic that we looked at this semester was no rescue wilderness areas. In this presentation, we're going to do an overview of the entire topic, give a little background information, and then dive deeper into the pros and cons that we covered in our research paper this semester.
Yeah, so let's get right to it. What is a no rescue wilderness area? In its simplest form, a no rescue wilderness area is a tract of land or water on which a rescue would not be attempted even in the event of an SOS emergency.
So, along with the idea of these areas, there are other things to consider as well. Some of these are search and rescue teams and how they will be affected, the actual land areas of which these no rescue wilderness areas would reside, and the people that would be recreating or using the land in the no rescue wilderness areas.
Yeah, and that is just like a really quick glimpse of what is to come in this presentation. So more specifically, we'll be looking at 3 pros of no rescue wilderness areas: a greater outdoor experience and feeling of total self-reliance, a reduction of cost for search and rescue teams, and a lesser impact on the land.
Yep. So the pros will be followed by 3 cons. The first one being the unethical nature of these areas, the idea that no intervention equals lawlessness, and the possibility of an individual wandering into these areas unknowingly. But before we dive into those, we can provide a little background of our topic.
Yeah. So as of right now, there have been no designated no rescue wilderness areas in the United States. But the topic has been pretty heavily debated since about 1980. Um, and these areas would be thought of as pristine, really austere environments. Yeah.
So the question is, what is a wilderness area? As the Wilderness Act of 1964 defines it, an area where the earth, its community, and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain in these areas.
And today there are 765 wilderness areas covering more than 109 million acres that are part of the National Wilderness Preservation System, which is managed by the Forest Service and 3 other land management agencies. Enthusiasts venture out to these wilderness areas to seek a feeling of self-reliance.
So the basis of this controversy is whether or not it is ethical to make no rescue wilderness areas. Is it ethical to allow people to die without any help, even if it was available, but they will not get it because of the area they were recreating in? This brings up many pros and cons of this issue.
Yeah, and let's say we were to designate a no rescue wilderness area, and a crime begins to unfold, and there's an injured person, and someone calls for help, and they're in this no rescue wilderness area. Would there be somebody to help? Those are kind of some of the controversial issues that have been debated about.
So in the next few slides, we're going to explore the pros of no rescue wilderness areas. These include a greater outdoor experience and a feeling of total self-reliance, the reduction of costs for search and rescue or SAR teams, and a lesser impact on the actual land that these areas would be found.
Yeah, and making these areas come to life would add a great sense of adventure and self-reliance for outdoor enthusiasts around the country. And having a concept like no rescue wilderness areas could be a great tool for conversation by for having fewer people on the land. Yeah.
So the first pro is that no rescue wilderness areas can feel more natural and are authentic to participants by creating an environment of complete self-reliance. This is what some people seek when they go out looking for a real sense of adventure in a wild place. Some would like these areas to feel austere or out there for them.
Yeah. And the feeling of being alone in the wilderness has been studied a lot by the Outward Bound School. This can bring the same feeling of self-reliance as in no rescue wilderness areas. When students go on an outward bound trip, there is almost always a solo portion to the trip, meaning there is time when a student will be alone for a range of a few hours, but no more than 72 hours.
So these solo portions are meant to be used as a reflective period and as a period to learn how to complete tasks and problem solve on one of the students' own. People want to learn more about themselves in wilderness, where they must be, completely self-reliant and have knowledge.
Yeah. And another pro of having no rescue wilderness areas is that search and rescue teams would not have to put their time and money into missions to care for injured or lost users. SAR teams are often built up of many different types of people, including EMTs, paramedics, firefighters, SAR technicians, high angle rescue technicians, and swiftwater rescue technicians.
So these rescue efforts for people that need rescue for many reasons that include allergic reactions, getting lost, or simply just being injured are usually paid for out of taxpayers' pockets. And SAR teams also put a lot of their own money into the rescue as well.
And according to the magazine article, the National Park Service spends nearly $5 million annually in search and rescue missions, and that doesn't include the hundreds of thousands of man hours that go into these searches. This is just one example of how much money we could save our taxpayers and rescue services on rescue missions.
So during the COVID-19 pandemic, when outdoor recreation has been at a peak in the last few decades because people were not allowed to gather or be inside with others, there's been a huge spike in rescue calls as well, where people have been getting hurt or lost, even though they weren't supposed, or they were supposed to be being extra careful.
Yeah. In addition to that, an already thinned health and emergency medical services in the U.S. had to respond to these calls, putting their lives on the line to rescue people who were venturing out, and not to mention the risk of them catching and further spreading of coronavirus. This is another risk that SAR teams take on in recent times.
Uh, lastly, there's Lastly, no rescue wilderness areas would help with the conservation of land and ease damage of flora, fauna, and animals in these wilderness areas. In simple terms, the fewer people that go out into wilderness areas, the less damage there will be to the land.
And when users of public lands like go into them, oftentimes there's damage done, whether or not it's via ignorance or intentionality. These users sometimes build fire pits where they're not permitted, litter, and make trails that aren't needed. And all of these aspects can cause deterioration of an environment faster than nature would in its natural state.
So each year, a total of more than 100 million pounds of trash is generated by park visitors in Denali National Park, Yosemite National Park, and Grand Teton National Park. This could be mitigated by making no rescue wilderness areas come to life, because these people might be steered away from these big places.
Yeah, and the amount of trash generated from those parks is 0.02% of 250 million tons of trash Americans create a year. For three national parks, this amount of trash is a detriment to the environment and our pristine areas. With fewer people traveling to these places, this would decrease by heaps and bounds.
So there are many other pros to this issue, but these are the ones we chose to research. If you're interested in other pros of this topic, you can do some research on your own. We would encourage it.
Yeah, totally. It's super cool. Um, so now that we've finished up our pros, we're going to start with our cons. The first con we looked at is the fact that these areas are extremely controversial, and the idea of not rescuing someone in need of help can be very troubling for someone. So this idea that these areas are unethical is a pretty huge con and carries a lot of weight by itself.
So I think that what is ethical and what is unethical to one person is not going to necessarily be the same for the next. So this is where we run into some issues on this topic. However, the majority of the folks in today's society would agree about that abandoning someone in need is unethical.
Yeah. And like if we could put a monetary value on human life, then maybe we'd be able to justify the means of these areas by looking at cost of governmental spending and SAR expenses. But I mean, life is the most precious thing on this planet. So I mean, how can we even do that?
So we can't And I think that tackling this controversial issue is the key to these areas. If we could somehow figure out the ethics of all of this, then maybe these areas would be able to come to fruition. And I think our humanistic society resolving this is far off.
Even with like this one con, we can see how problematic this topic is. Hold on to your hats because we've got two more for you. The second con we looked at is the idea of lack of patrol and intervention in these areas could lead to lawlessness.
This con has a lot of supporting evidence as populations have grown in these areas closer to national parks or forests or wilderness areas. There has been a pretty steady increase in crime within these natural environments from overflow into these forest areas from larger towns.
Yeah, and this is a concern for no rescue wilderness areas because if crime is increasing in these areas that's patrolled already and heavily monitored by park rangers, then what will happen when we have an area that's not patrolled by pretty much anyone? You can see how like crime would increase.
So Commander Barb Severson of the U.S. Forest Service stated that in a little less than 1 year, officers in the Mount Baker National Forest handed out 709 citations and wrote an additional 2,197 incident reports, which is a lot.
Yeah, Severson also stated that during the same time period, officers in Olympic National Forest issued 262 citations and recorded 875 incident reports. And Olympic National Park officers made 14 arrests and handed out 523 citations.
So these are only a few of the hundreds of parks and forests in the U.S. and crime like this is increasing all over these areas. Some of the violent and more serious offenses recorded, such as assaults, murder, drug cases, including meth labs. That's just to name a few of those.
Yeah, and again, these cases are on the rise now in parks and forests that are managed and monitored by park rangers. And what is to keep the crime from rising exponentially in an area that's not patrolled? If a crime is reported, will law officers venture out into these areas to intervene? Who's to say?
So another con that we looked at in our research was the idea of management of these areas and how keeping people out that don't desire, these high risk areas. So how would managers of the area be able to keep people from wandering into these no rescue wilderness areas unknowingly that's what they are?
Yeah. And obviously this is a question that we don't have an answer to because there's not an area like this. But we thought it was something worth mentioning, and it seems that these no rescue areas would be quite large, and like would the entire area have to be fenced off? To me, like that seems almost impossible.
So if somebody accidentally wandered in, to me it seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen. If something were to happen to this person and they died because they were unprepared and ignorant to the presence of the no rescue stipulations, their family could be entitled to a lot of money.
Yeah, and again, there are lots more pros and cons to this topic, but these are the ones that we chose to look at, and we thought that we provided a pretty good stance for both sides, the pros and the cons of no rescue wilderness.
So, in conclusion, no rescue wilderness areas are a true debate amongst outdoor recreators. On one side, we have those in support of them who use the arguments to the pure outdoor experience and the ultimate self-reliance experience and the reduction of costs for SAR teams and the preservation of the lands on which these areas would be placed.
And on the other side of that coin, we have those who oppose the idea of no rescue wilderness areas. Opposers use the argument of the unethical nature of these areas, the likelihood that crime would see an increase in these areas, and the concern of unwanted visitors venturing into the area unknowingly.
So these pros and cons are certainly not the only ones regarding the issue, but we felt that we could present a fairly balanced argument for both sides of the topic when all is said and all is done. And we feel, given the considerations, the cons outweigh the pros of no rescue wilderness areas. So thank you guys so much. We hope you enjoyed it.